Washington never expected it. Paris never imagined it. But on the morning of July 18, 2025, in the red dust of Ouagadougou, silence broke. At first, it sounded ordinary, engines grinding, hammers striking, bulldozers rolling forward. But it was not only construction noise, it was the heartbeat of a nation long dismissed as powerless, daring to take back its future. For decades, National Road No. 4 was a scar across Burkina Faso's map, 250 kilometers of broken promises. Once it carried trade, families, and hope. By the early 2000s, it carried only despair. Torrential rains carved gullies, sandstorms buried lanes, and every foreign-funded repair collapsed into failure. Buses stopped running. Mothers in labor preyed on motorcycles. Children trudged for hours through dust just to reach schools. Entire villages withered along its edges. The road became not only impassable but symbolic, a lifeline cut by dependency. That is why the sound of engines on July 18th mattered. At 6:15 a.m., workers gathered, ordinary citizens, not foreign consultants. Engineers, students, retired soldiers, teachers, even mothers with baskets of food. They came with their own hands, their own ideas, their own determination. No IMF blueprints, no World Bank signatures, no foreign loans, only the will to prove that sovereignty is not granted. It is claimed. What began as asphalt became something far larger. Pride, dignity. A question written into the ground itself. Could a so-called poor nation rise on its own terms? And if one road, just one artery, could shake the balance of an entire continent, what would happen if the spirit behind it spread? Stay with us, because this is not merely a story of machines and asphalt. It is a story of people refusing to beg, of dignity reclaimed, and of Africa daring to build without permission. This may be the very future our ancestors once dreamed of. For generations, National Road No. 4 was more than cracked pavement. It was a wound that stretched from the capital to the eastern frontier. Once it carried food to markets, children to classrooms, and the sick to hospitals. By the turn of the century, it carried only silence. Buses abandoned the route. Villages emptied. Torrents of rain cut deep ravines into the surface. In summer, the winds buried whole sections in sand. Foreign contractors arrived with promises of repair, but every project collapsed before completion. For families living along the road, RN4 became a daily reminder that others decided their future. It was not simply a transport issue, it was the story of dependence etched into the earth. That memory lingered until a morning in July 2025. Long before the sun climbed high, voices gathered along the battered route. Men and women arrived with tools strapped to bicycles. Young apprentices carried notebooks, ready to study each movement of heavy machinery. Retired soldiers tightened their boots as if returning to duty. Teachers brought whistles and clipboards to organize shifts. Mothers prepared baskets of porridge and water for those who would work under the punishing heat. At 6:15, the first engine roared, and the ground itself seemed to tremble. Not with fear this time, but with resolve. What made this gathering extraordinary was not the number of people, but their refusal to wait for permission. No international consultants surveyed the land. No Western bank stamped approval on a loan. The blueprint was drawn by conviction. The materials came from the soil itself. Discarded tires were crushed and layered as a resilient base. Bamboo harvested in northern fields was woven into mesh that replaced expensive imports. Clay mixed with lime was shaped into channels that guided floodwater away. Drones coded by students from the Polytechnic mapped the terrain. Every kilometer carried the fingerprints of the people who lived beside it. The effect was immediate. In Zorgo, elders prayed aloud while watching graders roll past for the first time in years. In Dapalogo, women formed what they called a breakfast brigade, serving hot millet each morning to more than 100 builders. In Manga, a retired teacher named Musa directed traffic with the pride of a conductor leading an orchestra. He told a journalist, "For 25 years, I taught my students about civic duty. Today, I am living it." In Lumbila, teenagers volunteered just to learn how a compactor functioned. No one asked them to sign contracts. No one offered salaries. They simply appeared day after day, driven by the belief that their country could rise if they carried it with their own hands. The radio station in Ouagadougou soon launched a daily program called The Road Hour. Listeners sent letters that were read on air. Mothers describing safe journeys to clinics. Traders announcing their return to markets. Students writing about shorter walks to school. Families traveled miles just to touch the fresh black surface and whisper prayers of gratitude. Some wept openly, saying they finally felt connected to their own nation again. By the 20th day, nearly 80 kilometers had been completed. That pace was faster than any foreign-funded project had ever achieved on Burkinabe soil. Markets reopened along the corridor. Truck drivers who once avoided the route returned. Small traders carried onions, tomatoes, and textiles toward the capital without fear of ruin. The air filled not only with the smell of asphalt, but with a sense of belonging. Each kilometer paved was also a page of history rewritten. News of the progress did not remain within Burkina Faso. Delegations from Mali, Niger, and Chad quietly sent observers. They came not only to study engineering techniques, but to understand what the road represented, a declaration that Africans could build without permission slips from abroad. An emissary from Bamako put it plainly, "This is not about a highway, this is about self-belief." Their words echoed across radios and social media, carried far beyond the Sahel. At the heart of the effort stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré's decree. He had announced that the nation would no longer depend on loans or imported labor to build its arteries. The RN4 project became the first proof of that vision. But while his order gave direction, it was the people who gave life. The asphalt did not belong to a ministry or a foreign company. It belonged to those who mixed the clay, cooked the meals, patrolled at night, and guided the bulldozers. What emerged was more than infrastructure. It was a rehearsal of sovereignty practiced with every shovel of soil and every meter of stone. The road revealed that independence could be expressed not only in speeches, but in sweat, in patience, in collective faith. That truth resonated more deeply than any government announcement. For the first time in decades, ordinary citizens no longer felt like passive subjects waiting for aid. They felt like participants in shaping their nation. The transformation of RN4 asked a larger question. If one neglected road could be revived by unity and local ingenuity, what might happen if the same spirit touched schools, hospitals, and factories? Would Burkina Faso remain the exception, or would it become the model for an entire continent? This is the heartbeat of the story. A highway reborn not by foreign money, but by the will of its people. A declaration that dignity can be laid down like stones, 1 kilometer at a time. And as the dust settled on those first weeks, a greater anticipation began to build. Something else was coming, a voice ready to give the new road its manifesto. The sound of machines had not yet faded when a new tremor moved through Burkina Faso. It was not the rumble of engines, but the cadence of a human voice. In a modest hall in Ouagadougou, wooden chairs scraped against the floor as farmers, engineers, and students crowded in. Many had come straight from the roadworks, their clothes still carrying dust. They were tired, but their eyes were restless, searching for words equal to what they had built. When Dr. Erikana Chihombori Kwao stepped to the microphone, silence pressed down on the room. She looked at her audience as though she had known them all her life. Then she spoke. Africa is not poor. Africa is being looted. The stillness shattered. Applause erupted like a storm breaking over the Sahel. Some shouted until their voices cracked. Others wept. Others raised their fists high. It was not a performance. It was recognition, like hearing a long-buried truth spoken aloud at last. Her speech refused the expected script. Listeners thought she would recite the familiar list of institutions. Instead, she spoke in images. A friend who returns a stolen goat, she said, is worth more than one who lends milk. The crowd laughed, then stiffened, because they knew the parable pointed to something far larger. She did not need to name the culprits. Everyone understood. Outside the hall, a group of young programmers who had once mapped RN4 with homemade drones streamed her words live. Within hours, the recording crossed borders. By nightfall, it echoed from radios in Dakar. In Accra, taxi drivers replayed it for passengers. In Lagos, a senator quoted her line during a televised debate, asking why Africa continued to negotiate with thieves. What began as a local gathering had already ignited a continental refrain. Inside the hall, a moment of unexpected tenderness deepened the impact. An elderly teacher rose, his hands trembling as he asked to speak. "I spent decades telling children about civic duty," he said softly, "but today, you, the builders of this road, have taught me what those words mean." The applause that followed engulfed him like a wave. For many in the audience, it was proof that even quiet voices carried the weight of revolution. Yet as the cheers rolled on, darker currents stirred. Foreign journalists framed the assembly as dangerous populism. Analysts in Washington whispered about strategic risks. In Paris, newspapers called Captain Ibrahim Traoré reckless. The very powers that once claimed to champion progress now looked unsettled, as though a few kilometers of asphalt in a single speech had somehow redrawn the map. What had begun as construction now carried the force of a manifesto. One road built with ordinary hands, one speech rooted in unvarnished truth, together formed a declaration. Sovereignty could be practiced and spoken in the same breath. For the first time in years, ordinary citizens felt not like subjects of policy, but participants in destiny. But history carries shadows. Libya dreamed of its own financial path, Iraq of sovereignty beyond oil, and both were crushed by storms they could not contain. Would Burkina Faso walk into the same storm? Could a small nation, bold yet fragile, endure the pressure now gathering beyond its borders? As the crowd poured into the night, their voices still ringing with defiance, they were not thinking of sanctions or strategies. They thought of their children walking to school on a road that no longer swallowed their feet in dust. They thought of markets alive again, of dignity restored. Their joy was undeniable. Yet beneath it, a question flickered, like a lantern in the dark. If one gathering of farmers, students, and teachers can send ripples across continents, what might happen when the entire nation decides it will no longer ask for permission? The weeks that followed brought visible changes to daily life. Along the corridor of RN4, classrooms that once echoed half-empty began to fill again. Teachers reported that children arrived not drenched in sweat from walking for hours, but alert and ready to learn. In Zorgo, a principal told the radio, "The road has given us back our students." Attendance jumped almost overnight, as if education itself had been waiting for a smoother path. Markets revived with the same speed. Farmers who once watched vegetables rot under the sun now loaded them on trucks at dawn and reached Ouagadougou before noon. In Fada, a women's cooperative shipped hand-woven cloth to the capital, proud that their work finally moved as quickly as their ambition. Herdsmen from the east carried fresh meat to hospitals, a delivery that had been unthinkable for years. A shopkeeper in Manga explained it best. "We used to wait for help. Now we feel like we are the help." The sense of dignity was not confined to commerce. Families began gathering along the road on Sundays, treating the new asphalt like a symbol of reunion. Children raced their bicycles across the fresh surface, cheering as though they were part of a festival. Parents pointed at the smooth black line and told them, "This is yours." For a country long accustomed to broken promises, even a stretch of finished highway became a storybook of possibility. The government moved quickly to channel this momentum. Captain Ibrahim Traoré announced the creation of an Infrastructure Sovereignty Council, a body tasked with ensuring that 80% of all public works would be funded domestically by 2030. Unlike past committees that operated behind closed doors, this council held sessions broadcast live on radio, inviting citizens to hear debates about budgets and materials. For many Burkinabe, it was the first time they felt included in the architecture of policy itself. The funding sources carried a symbolism as strong as the road. Gold reserves once held abroad were repatriated. Bonds were issued and purchased by local investors, not foreign banks. Ministries saved money by canceling contracts with consultants who had charged millions for studies that produced little more than paper. Each franc redirected to local engineers became both an economic decision and a moral statement. The future would no longer be mortgaged to outsiders. A dramatic twist came when the European Union offered a $500 million loan to expand further infrastructure. Instead of celebrating the offer, the government turned it down publicly. The statement was blunt. Burkina Faso will not exchange dignity for asphalt. The refusal stunned Brussels but electrified Ouagadougou. Crowds poured into the streets, waving flags, chanting that sovereignty was no longer a slogan but a practice. Trust in institutions soared, with surveys showing confidence levels more than 60% higher than the year before. Young professionals who once dreamed of emigrating suddenly reconsidered. Applications flooded into new engineering programs launched by the state. For them, RN4 was not just a road, but a recruitment poster for national service. A student in Bobo Dioulasso explained, "If we can build this without asking permission, then maybe we can build everything else." The idea of serving the nation, once overshadowed by the lure of foreign opportunities, now felt honorable again. Not all reactions were joyous. Rumors swirled of sabotage attempts on construction equipment. Local patrols, often made up of retired soldiers, reported catching saboteurs near storage sites. No one claimed responsibility, but the incidents reminded citizens that their new pride carried risks. It was a quiet warning that success could provoke resistance, even from shadows within. Still, the mood in the country was unmistakably different. For the first time in decades, the state and the people seemed to move in the same rhythm. The asphalt carried not only trucks and buses, but also trust, a fragile yet powerful cargo. Every kilometer laid down was a reminder that the nation could walk on its own legs. Yet beneath the celebrations, another question grew louder. History shows that when small nations take bold steps, the world beyond their borders does not always applaud. If Burkina Faso could reclaim its road and its dignity without loans, what might other countries attempt next? And more importantly, how would the old powers react when they realized the model could spread far beyond one stretch of highway? In Washington, the road in Burkina Faso appeared not as an engineering project, but as a warning. Memos circulated quietly through the National Security Council, classifying the RN4 as part of a new post-Western development model. Analysts wrote that the danger was not insurgency or terrorism. The danger was independence. If Burkina Faso could pave its arteries without loans, the influence of the United States in the Sahel could vanish within 5 years. Think tanks scrambled to convene panels. Titles appeared overnight. The rise of military populism in the Sahel, strategic realignment in West Africa. In private, officials admitted they feared a domino effect. A single highway, they said, had become more disruptive than any battlefield. Paris felt the tremor even more deeply. French influence had already eroded as Ouagadougou expelled troops and distanced itself from the CFA franc. Now, RN4 stood as living proof that development could continue without French oversight. Newspapers painted Captain Ibrahim Traoré as reckless, authoritarian, even dangerous. Yet at home, those labels only fueled his popularity. In Bamako, Niamey, and N'Djamena, politicians began to cite Burkina Faso as an example. One French diplomat confessed off record, "We thought the threat was Chinese infrastructure. We were wrong. The threat is African self-confidence." The silence of global finance was equally telling. The IMF and World Bank, usually eager to issue statements, said nothing. Negotiations froze. A $50 million loan offer sat unanswered on a desk in Ouagadougou. For once, Africa was not being lectured. It was being observed. Beyond Africa, the echoes spread to unexpected places. In the Caribbean, activists pointed to RN4 as evidence that small nations could chart their own course. In Brazil, community leaders spoke of Burkina Faso as a symbol of South-South solidarity. In the United States, African-American churches replayed Dr. Arikana's words, weaving them into sermons about faith and dignity. On social media, the phrase "build without chains" became both slogan and prayer. Yet admiration does not guarantee protection. History shows that when small nations step outside the boundaries of the old order, consequences follow. Sanctions, disinformation, covert interference, these are the quiet weapons of power. The question hanging in the air was not whether Burkina Faso had inspired the continent. It was whether the continent was ready to defend what Burkina Faso had begun. For older Americans watching, the story carried a familiar echo. In 1776, their own forefathers faced an empire that never imagined it could lose control. Now, a nation in West Africa was declaring a similar audacity. Different century, different soil, but the same demand for dignity. So the reflection turns outward. If freedom is celebrated in American memory, should it not also be recognized when it rises abroad? And if a single road in Burkina Faso can unsettle the corridors of Washington and Paris, what does that say about the balance of power in our world today? If one road can shake the halls of Washington and Paris, then the question is no longer about asphalt. It is about balance, about power, about the future of nations that refuse to wait. Burkina Faso has shown that the smallest act of defiance, when carried out with unity, can echo louder than any speech delivered in foreign capitals. From the red dust of Ouagadougou to the voices rising across Africa, the RN4 has become more than a line on the map. It has become a mirror. It shows what a people can achieve when they stop asking and start doing. It reveals that wealth is not measured in aid packages, but in dignity, in the courage to rely on one's own soil, one's own hands. Yet history reminds us that new paths are never left unchallenged. Libya once dreamed of a currency free from foreign grip. Iraq once sought sovereignty beyond oil. Both face storms unleashed in silence. The danger for Burkina Faso is not open invasion, but the subtler weapons of pressure. Sanctions, sabotage, distorted headlines. If vigilance fades, the old order will quietly return. But today, something different stirs. Farmers loading trucks at dawn feel it. Mothers who now ride safely to hospitals sense it. Children who arrive at school with energy to learn embody it. Independence is no longer an abstract idea whispered in textbooks. It is lived in every kilometer of smooth road, every classroom filled again, every market alive with trade. So what does this mean for you, watching from afar? For your grandchildren who will inherit the world we shape today? Will they remember Africa as a continent chained to lenders, or as a continent that dared to write its own story? And if they ask what you did when nations stood up, what answer will you give? Your reflection matters. Share your thoughts below, not for algorithms, but for conscience. Share this story, not for numbers, but for memory. Subscribe, not as a click, but as a declaration that truth deserves an audience and that Africa's voice must not be silenced again. Because in the end, this story is not only about Burkina Faso, it is about every people who choose dignity over dependence. Every act of courage that dares to rewrite history. They can close their ears, they can twist the news, but they cannot stop a nation that walks forward together. This is not just a road, it is a signal fire. Burkina Faso will not beg. Africa will not wait. The continent will no longer ask. It will define.